The Mustang Mach-E was always set to make a lot of people a little bit angry. Ford, after all, had transplanted the name most famous for being a V8 coupe onto a four-door electric SUV. But let's say you're on board with this concept, or maybe you're just watching this video because you're cross-shopping this segment for all your electric EV midsize options. If you ignore the pony badge, what's this car like as an SUV? What's it like as an EV, and how does it compare to its competitors? Well, I've been driving this one here for 3 months and a few thousand Ks just to find out.
The Mach-E can be had from $72,990 before on-road costs, and that's for the base model Select, making it significantly more expensive than some of its rivals like the Subaru Solterra, Toyota BZ4X, and Hyundai Ioniq 5. Although it competes more closely with the sportier Kia EV6, which in its entry-level form can be had for similar money. There are also two other Mach-E variants which get significantly more expensive. Above the base Select, there's the Premium, which offers a much larger battery and up to 600 kilometers of driving range, while the top spec GT tips well over $100,000, but nearly doubles the performance on offer with its dual motor all-wheel drive powertrain.
Actually though, I reckon the one that we've been driving for this review is by far the best value, because not only do you get pretty much all the equipment, but you get plenty of power channeled to those rear wheels, and the 470 kilometers of range available in this supposedly standard range battery is all most people will need.
Helping justify its price though, the standard equipment even here in the base car includes things which you only see on high-grade rivals, like synthetic leather interior seat trim, heated and power adjust front seats, a panoramic sunroof, a Bang & Olufsen 10-speaker audio system, and a wireless phone charger. And this is alongside other items like the huge 15.5-inch multimedia touchscreen with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster, 19-inch alloy wheels, and a 360-degree parking suite. If you want a bit more on the rest of the Mach-E range, check out my launch review over at carsguide.com.au.
Now, I should mention that you also get an included app like you do on most electric cars now, but it's nowhere near as good as that industry standard setting Tesla app where you can control even the finer functions of the car. This app does have a few basic things which are quite useful. For example, you can remotely start the car, which starts the air conditioning if it was on when you got out of the car last. You can unlock it, you can lock it again, you can see how much range you've got left, you can see where the car is, and these sorts of things can be kind of handy, but it would be nice to see a little bit of improvement for this app. It's a bit laggy and stuff as well. It's just a bit of a missed opportunity, but it is something that can be fixed with future software updates.
Next up, let's talk design. I've met people who really love the styling, I met people who really hate the styling, but I have to say, this car really grew on me. I started out not really being sold by the curvy bits offset by the square Mustang-y lights at the back, but the more I looked at it, the more I liked it.
So one note on the styling. I reckon this car looks pretty amazing now, but that's only because I just cleaned it. These gloss finishes here around the styling pieces and the wheels, they look $1 million when they're all shiny and clean, but they get dirty really quickly and they get kind of like a matte finish, and it makes this car look a little bit more Mad Max than it does right now. Now, hopping in the interior of the Mach-E, and one feature that really divided people when it came to the styling is this massive screen. Some people loved it, some people really hated it when I showed it to them. I've kind of gotten used to it. I don't notice it as much as I used to when I first got in this car. It does look a little out of place. It just sort of sits there forward in this otherwise nicely symmetrical dashboard. So it is a bit of a controversial piece here. We'll talk more about it in a sec, but the rest of the interior is very forward when it comes to its styling, and this means it does kind of have a bit of a grayscale appeal. There's not kind of a lot of attention to detail like there is in competitor products like Kia's EV6 or Hyundai's Ioniq 5 in terms of pattern work and innovative materials and these kinds of things. However, it is quite luxurious in here. There's a lot of nice soft touch materials throughout. And I've got to say that Bang & Olufsen speaker dock sort of design across the top here, and this kind of shark tooth inlay that goes across here, which is one of the only ways you can tell Mach-E grades apart. They are really nice touches, and because the rest of it is quite grayscale and generic, they do stand out a bit more and make this interior a bit special. All right, so on the topic of practicality, you do get a nice spacious interior in here, because keep in mind, it is a global car, but it does primarily have to appeal to that US audience as well. So there's plenty of space. It's really comfy. There's like really spongy seat trim, which I love. You just sort of sink into these seats. They're lovely. Now, in terms of storage, there is plenty throughout this cabin as well. In the door here, you do get a nice bottle holder, but it's height limited by this kind of protruding armrest piece. So our large CarsGuide bottle can only fit on its side down there. You get a further two in this center console, a wireless charger on this side and another spot for a phone, which is kind of good because you can sort of cable one phone up and have another on the wireless charger. Always a nice touch. You've got your USB ports hidden away down here as well, so you don't have to have cables cluttering up too much of the cabin. And you've got a nice big sort of storage pass through underneath as well. Moving up this console area here, and you've got a floating armrest piece, which isn't a box, it doesn't open up, but underneath there is a box with its own kind of roller cover to the top of it there, which is nice. And of course you get as well a glove box in there too. Now, you can't talk practicality without also talking software on today's screens, because they take up so much of the cabin and they control so many of the functions. Now, you might have noticed straight away that there are no shortcut buttons in here. There's just the one big dial and a couple of buttons for parking functions, the handbrake and stuff here. But on this software, you do get a dedicated strip for your climate controls, heated seats, heated steering wheel, and you press a button on there to fold out a tray that has all the rest of these climate functions. It's a little frustrating. It did take me a little while to figure out how to use them all, because in the tray you've got like the recirculate button, for example. You've got the on and off button for the climate. I'd love to have a shortcut button for that. But other than that, it mostly works quite well. This dial here primarily controls volume, but it is multifunction. If you press the fan speed controller, for example, you can control it with the dial as well. So this is kind of a way of Ford having one dial, but also letting you control things that it should be controlled with a dial. Does it work? I think it would be better to have 2 or 3 dials here, but that's just me personally. Elsewhere, the software is pretty functional, it's pretty fast. It sometimes lags a little bit when you start the car up, which can be a bit disconcerting. You know, you've driven for 30 seconds down the road before you can even see anything going on this screen. But there are also some cool functions in here which I haven't seen in many EVs before, or I haven't seen across the board. You've got a really great trip computer in here, which shows you where all of your sort of battery capacity is disappearing to, where it's gone to climate, where it's gone to exterior temperatures, some cool things like that. And you've also got some innovative kind of safety features which you can turn all of them off for a start, and secondly, you can even adjust the tolerances of some of them, which is kind of clever. Next up, let's go sit in the back seat. Everybody who's hopped in the backseat of the Mach-E has been impressed by the amount of space on offer and also how comfortable it is, because again, that spongy seat trim just continues. This has got to be one of the most comfortable mid-size SUVs I've sat in quite some time, actually, to the point where I actually think this is a fantastic long-distance tourer just because of the way it is. It's just so comfortable and quiet in here with the acoustic glass as well. Moving on to space. So as you can see, I've got plenty of room here. That's behind my own driving position for my knees. I've got plenty of room for my feet because there's no obstructions down here. There's no tunnel for the transmission or anything like that that you might have in a combustion car. And headroom is not too bad either, although you wouldn't want to be too much taller than me. Elsewhere, what do we get? So we've got pockets on the backs of the seats that are kind of nice and elastic. You've got 2 adjustable air vents, but no bespoke climate zone back here, which some other cars at this price point might get. You've also got a lock off for those vents, and there's a USB-C port and a USB 2 port as well. Now, one disappointment I did have with this car is there's no 3-pin power outlet, like a household power outlet, because you do get that in a lot of the Hyundai Group products and some other cars as well. And it's fantastic because you can charge full devices, you can power things at campgrounds, and this car just doesn't have that, which again, a little bit of a missed opportunity, a bit of a shame. Storage, you get a bottle holder in the door here. Again, it's just like the one in the front. It's not tall enough to fit our CarsGuide bottle. It has to sit on its side. And then in this drop-down armrest, you've got 2 more, but they don't have the variable edges. So if your bottle's a little bit smaller than this one, it might just tip out in the corners.
The boot comes in at 402 litres, which is on the smaller side for this mid-size segment, and the boot floor is a bit high. This does leave you storage underneath for your cables and inflator kit, but it also doesn't leave much room before you start blocking the rear window.
Now again, one of the reasons why I think this Select is such great value is because it's got heaps of power channeled to those rear wheels. 198 kilowatts, 430 Newton meters is the official figure. And while it's not quite as fast as some of those breakneck all-wheel drive rivals, it's also not as expensive. Now, before we get to driving it, let's talk range. This base Select version gets 470 k's WLTP, as we've already talked about. But take it from someone who's driven multiple EVs with different range capacities over the last few years, I can tell you once you get above that kind of 450k mark, you don't notice range anxiety anymore. After all, once you're on the freeway, you do need to stop every couple of hours to take a break, so why not charge while you're doing it? Now, 470 k's, does it achieve that in the real world? Well, I did put that to the test over a longer range trip that I took in this car. For more information on that, make sure to check out Chapter 2 of my long-term review of this car over at carsguide.com.au. Now, in my 3 months of testing, this car produced an average kilowatt hour consumption of 16, which is really good, not just because it's better than the claim that this car wears, but also because my testing involved multiple very long freeway journeys where electric cars are less efficient, so I'm pretty impressed by it.
For reference, my back of the napkin numbers has the Mach-E delivering within 10% of its maximum range claim on the open road, which is pretty impressive and speaks to proper temperature management for its motor and battery. When it comes to charging, all Mach-E's charge at a maximum rate of 150 kilowatts on DC, which is sort of becoming the average for this segment. Obviously, the 800-volt Korean cars can charge a bit faster, but with a 10 to 80% charge time of about 30 minutes, you'll be back on the road nice and fast. In my travels, the maximum my Mach-E seemed to be able to hit on a DC unit was about 120 or 130 kilowatts, tapering off to 80 kilowatts and then 50 kilowatts as it got closer to that 80% charge level. I do think the EV6 long-termer I had prior was able to hold a significantly higher charge rate for a longer period, but the ultimate difference in rapid charging only seems to be about 5 or 10 minutes, which is worth thinking about if you're shopping around. In a final charging observation, the port is located at the front left of the car quite far back from the bumper, which meant at some stations I had a hard time pulling the fast charging cable out far enough to reach.
In this increasingly busy mid-size electric SUV space, it is getting increasingly difficult for cars to stand out. And you're probably wondering whether the Mustang Mach-E lives up to the Mustang badge. Does it actually drive like a Mustang? The answer is no. You see, the thing is, the Mach-E is far too civilized for that. This feels more like a luxury European SUV than its muscle car namesake. It very much starts with the seating position. If you're expecting something a bit sportier, the Mustang Mach-E has a very SUV seating position. You're very high off the ground, you're peering down over that dash in the front. There's nothing really inherently sporty about it at all. But that's until you start driving it, because this car has some really fantastic characteristics that I think particularly set it apart from the rest of the mid-size SUV space, even ones that I really like. So while you're sitting really high off the ground, the first thing I notice is the steering. It's just got a lovely weight to it. There's nothing artificial about it at all. In fact, it feels a lot like any really nice Grand Tourer to steer and tip into corners. It's full of feel, it's full of emotion, and that's so rare for an electric SUV. I think the ride as well is really well tuned for our roads. This is something that's notoriously hard to get right for an EV because they carry a lot of extra weight. And Ford Australia tells us when they were getting this car for Australian standards, they had a few tunes to pick from around the world, and they picked one that they thought suited our roads best, and they've done a fantastic job. The ride in this car is firm enough to make the Mach-E feel really connected, really sporty, and really confident in the corners, but it's not so firm that it really ruins the ride like a lot of its competitors. It's not the softest tune on the market, it's not the most comfortable SUV on the market, but it does strike what I think is probably the perfect balance between performance and ride quality in an EV like this. So when you blend that ride quality and that steering together, you get a car which is actually really fun to drive despite looking like it does, like a big SUV. And you've also got a lot of confidence in those corners thanks to that long wheelbase and some quite good tires. So it's a lot of fun, but I was a bit worried that a car with a sportier kind of tune like this one would get a little tiresome over longer trips, but that turned out not to be the case at all. This car is actually a fantastic tourer. These seats remain so comfortable after hours behind the wheel. The acoustic glass and the great sound system do their best to keep noise out of the cabin as well, which can also be a problem for EVs as there's no engine noise. And I was left really impressed with a car that kept you refreshed after long journeys too. So it's a great tourer, it's great in the corners, and this is why there are so many little things about this car that really grew on me over time and just made me like it more and more the more I drove it. And I'm going to say something funny now, which is probably going to sound wrong, but this car, just the way it feels, the way it drives, the way it's such a great tourer on the open road, actually reminds me a lot of an FG Falcon I used to own. So if you're one of those people who has hopped out of a big Aussie sedan and you're looking for that kind of feeling in an electric car, well, this is pretty much it. Now, if there are two main negative takeaways I'd have from the drive experience of this car, the first is the ride does have a sort of secondary jiggle to it, which can get on your nerves a little bit, especially if you've got a particularly bumpy street around you at those low speeds. The second thing is with the tires that are on this one, while they seem to have a pretty decent amount of grip, they do let a little bit of tire noise into the cabin, particularly on coarse grained surfaces. They're actually really good on finely grained surfaces, but on coarse grained surfaces, not so great. There is a fair bit of droning that enters the cabin, so it's not perfect, but it is pretty good. Now, I should note a quick thing about that long trip that we had when it comes to range, because I can imagine some people might be a little bit disappointed to charge one of these up to 100% and only see 380 Ks on the dash when they should be getting 100 Ks more. But it turns out there's a pretty obvious reason for that, and it's to do with the way that the range number that's displayed on the dash here is calculated. It seems to take an average of your current drive, not the average of your current trip. And so this means that when you charge it up, it will actually show you a lot less on that dash than it is actually capable of, which is confusing and potentially annoying for a new EV owner. But what will happen is as you keep driving the car, that range will figure it out and it will even itself out over time. And as I said back in the efficiency section of this review, yes, it will achieve pretty close to the advertised WLTP range. So nothing too much to worry about there. All right, so where does that leave the Mach-E in the hierarchy of these sort of mid-size electric SUVs? Because there's quite a few of them, and it just so happens that I've driven pretty much all of them. I'd say it's not as comfortable and versatile as something like the Ioniq 5, but it's more comfortable, I found, than the EV6, which I've also had as a long-termer. In fact, while I liked the EV6 on paper, and it's objectively quite a good car, there's so many things about this that are not objectively measurable that I really like about it and have ended up preferring. I would much prefer one of these to an EV6, so I'd recommend driving both before you decide. Now, there are a handful of also brand new options in this space. Cars like the Subaru Solterra and its Toyota BZ4X twin. I just drove the Solterra last week and I can tell you it's probably more comfortable than this car, but it's way less sporty as well. If you're looking for sportiness, this is more what you'll be looking for, but if you're looking for versatility, well, there's some different options there as well. So you do really kind of have to drive a few before you settle on one, I think. Now, you can't talk about one of these modern EVs with all these safety functions without covering off how annoying the safety features are, and thankfully in this car, they're really, really laid back. Unlike the Kia EV6 and Hyundai Ioniq 5, which have really quite annoying lane keep and lane departure softwares, the systems in this car are very laid back. I found it only sort of nudges the steering if I'm really erring close to the lane. It's not constantly attacking me with beeps and bongs for all sorts of safety systems. It's just really a driver's car, and I really appreciate that about it. For the full list of safety features and all that sort of stuff, check out our full review over at carsguide.com.au.
The Mach-E range, with the exception of the top spec GT, has a maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating. Expect the usual 5-year and unlimited kilometre warranty which Ford offers, while the battery is covered by its own 8-year and 160,000 kilometre promise.
Now, what might be a little frustrating is, unlike some other EVs on the market, the Mach-E does need to be serviced every year or 15,000 Ks to stick to its schedule. Thankfully though, the servicing is pretty cheap. It's $130 for one service and $180 for the other, and it alternates for the first 5 years. So not too expensive, which is what we like to see. So there you have it, the Mustang Mach-E Select. I was really worried that this would just feel like another electric SUV. There wouldn't be anything special about it to justify that pony badge or really separate it from its competitors in this space. And there are some very good competitors in this space. But here's the thing, after 3 months of running it, it's infectious. It got under my skin. It really grew on me in so many ways. There are so many little things about this car that I really love. Even the styling grew on me. So while it's not a great value electric SUV in this space, it is one that is full of character, that stands out from the crowd a little bit. It's a great tourer. It's fantastic to drive. In fact, I think it's one of my favorite electric cars to drive. And there you have it. That's why it's special to me. I'm really sad to see this one go.